Chapter 9. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. When Rose opened her eyes and found herself back in the garden, she didn't waste any time in waking the others up. They gathered inside the girls' tent, and Rose and George updated the others on what had happened and what they needed to do today. Alex was the first to speak. "This is so bad," he said, putting his hands up to his face. "What's wrong, Alex?" asked Callum, concerned about his little brother. "Violet, you tell him," replied Alex, looking down to the ground. "I can't bear to say it." "Oh dear, I don't know where to start," began Violet. "I made it over to the Butterfly Kingdom to help Alex, but it was too late. Alex had changed in some way. He was all deformed and turned grey. It was horrible. The other butterflies had locked him inside a glass cage to quarantine him from them. They said his fears had got the better of him and that he had turned into a monster. This is what had happened to so many of the other animals when Mora had attacked them before. Once they were at this stage, they were easy pickings, and now, because they were struck with fear, it was easy for Mora to control them. It wasn't long from that point before they would start lashing with anger. Seeing Alex like this was horrible. What can we do?"
"There has to be some way to turn him back," said Callum, reassuring them all. "This isn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot," said Izzy, joining in. "Don't worry, Alex. We will find a way to get you back to normal." "This is not going well, is it?" said Rose solemnly. "I'm really sorry I dragged you guys into this. And it looks like it could be all for nothing anyway. Mora said my mum and dad are dead, and that I should give up looking for them."
"Rose, you must not believe her, and do not say that," said George, jumping into the conversation. "She's an evil liar. And she probably just said that to try and stop you from finding them, as she knows you're getting close." "Oh, I do hope so, George," replied Rose. "I couldn't bear it if this was all for nothing." "So let's stop moping around then, guys, and look at the positives," continued Izzy. "You could ask them about what they look like, and if they've been heard of since. George and Eldred are already with you, along with the other dragons. They're getting help from the wolves, bears, and gorillas. Violet has made it to Alex, and between her and the other eagles and butterflies, they can make it over to you sometime tomorrow. And they can even bring Alex with them. I'm sure there are other birds they can gather support from too."
"Yes," cried Violet. "The falcons have come with us, and they said they'll stay with us wherever we go." "Great," said Izzy. "I know I'll arrive at the Horses' Kingdom sometime tomorrow, and," Izzy continued, looking proud of herself, "I've got backup too, elephants and rhinos." "Whoa, that's brilliant," said George, smiling broadly. "We'll all be together, and that way we can try and figure out what we're going to do." "Well, Ruby's already reached me in the Duck Kingdom, along with the other dolphins," added Callum. "Yes, I got there not long before night time, and we brought with us the whales, the polar bears, the penguins, and the turtles." "Wow, that's an army in itself," continued Izzy. "Do you think you'll be able to make it to the Horses' Kingdom by tomorrow too?"
"Yes, definitely. We've already discussed it. We'll arrive there sometime tomorrow evening," said Ruby. Rose had been sat there listening to all the updates and plans. She'd been taking it in, but inside she felt uneasy. Everyone was still talking and getting excited about how they were all going to meet inside the Crystal Kingdom. She knew she should be happy about this, but she was really worried about what Moira had said. She'd been sitting near the entrance of the tent, and she could see out into the garden and up into the house. All the adults were laughing and talking, although she couldn't hear what they were saying. It was another bright sunny morning, and the garden was full of life. Bees were dancing from one flower to another, and the birds were chirping from the trees overhead. She looked back at the others, who were all staring at her. "What?" she asked. "Your hair," said George. "It's pink. And it's glowing."
"That's crazy, it can't have been. Mind you, with everything else that's going on, that seems to be the least crazy thing. I wonder why it did that. It's never happened before. Well, at least I think it's never happened before. Just as she said that, there was a shout from the house across the garden. "Children, are you up yet? It's nearly 11 o'clock," came the sound of Alice's voice. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson are here. Go upstairs and get yourselves ready, and then come back down and help us get lunch ready, please." The children jumped up and ran into the house and got themselves ready as quick as they could, and then started helping out in the kitchen. Soon after, they were all sitting down together to a lovely lunch of pizza and pasta. Although Izzy didn't really like pizza, which she just described as cheese on bread and pointless, so she just had extra carbonara, which was her favourite anyway.
Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were really nice. They were a sweet old couple, really, with silver hair and smiling faces. They told them all about the area and how they'd been together for the last 14 years. Mr. Johnson had met Mrs. Johnson in the local community centre, and she had been amazed that she'd never bumped into him since they had both lived in the same town all of their lives. "We bought this house straight away," explained Mrs. Johnson. "We just fell in love with it." "Well, actually, you fell in love with it first, didn't you, darling? You were quite obsessed with it, in fact. Eventually, you convinced me that we should buy it, and so we did." She smiled at her husband as he nodded enthusiastically and gazed back at her adoringly. Then, suddenly, about 18 months ago, he said that he didn't feel as comfortable getting up and down the stairs. So he moved into a bungalow in town and started renting this house out to families for their holidays. We do hope you like it here. "Oh, we love it, everyone, don't we?" said Alice, looking around. Everyone replied at once that it was lovely.
In fact, young Rose here has been an admirer of this place for a long time too. She was desperate for us to come here for this holiday so she could find out about her mum and dad. Rose, why don't you tell them about the photo? Photo? What photo? Asked Mr. Johnson suddenly. Let me see it. Darling, what's got into you? Said Mrs. Johnson, laughing nervously, blushing and slightly embarrassed by her husband's bluntness. Rose sat there, frozen to the spot. Suddenly she couldn't speak. She had so much she wanted to ask them all about the photo and about her mum and dad, but she literally couldn't say a word. It was like she had been struck dumb. She looked around and opened and shut her mouth, but no words came out, not even a squeak. She could feel her heart beating faster. Go on, Rose. Tell them about your photo, about your dreams. This is your chance to try and find out about your mum and dad.
Mum, I don't think she wants to, interrupted George. Maybe she's not feeling well. Well, she looks okay. Maybe it's better if you tell them instead, George, said Alice. Feeling slightly uncomfortable that her guests were looking at her with a "can't you control your children" expression all over their face. "No, Mum, I don't think I can remember about it," said George pleadingly. "This is outrageous," said Mr. Johnson, standing up suddenly. "David, what are you doing?" whispered Mrs. Johnson out the corner of her mouth, staring at her husband in disbelief. "I'm so sorry," said Mr. Johnson, catching himself suddenly. "I just wasn't feeling well suddenly." "I'll be all right. I just need to sit down for a moment." A minute passed and no one said a word. Outside there was a big clap of thunder, followed by flashings of lightning. A few seconds later, the heavens opened up and rain poured down, hammering on the patio doors.
"Oh my goodness! Where did that come from?" said Alice to the other adults in shock. "It was looking so lovely. Let me make everyone a cup of tea." "I'll do it," said Lucy, jumping up, and she scurried around the kitchen getting everyone's drinks ready. When they had all settled back down, Alice turned to Mr. Johnson and said, "Mr. Johnson, as you've lived here for such a long time, why don't you tell us some stories about your time here? I'm sure the children would love to hear about it. That's if you're feeling up to it, of course." Mr. Johnson smiled. He looked around the room at the adults and the children, and then spoke very slowly. "Yes, I've got a story for you," he began.